I just think there's a great opportunity to do better in building. And, we're one component of that. And of course, we're proud of what we do. But there's lots of ways to do better. And, that's a conversation that we got into. We've embraced the opportunity to be a part of it because we're doing our homework and we're learning and we have something of value to add to this equation. It's just this big education process, right? And there are lots of people out there that want to learn more.
You're listening to the Good Dirt Podcast. This is a place where we dig into the nitty-gritty of sustainable living through food, fashion, and lifestyle.
And we're your hosts, Emma and Mary Kingsley, the mother-daughter founder team of Lady Farmer. We're sowing seeds of slow living through our community platform, events, and online marketplace.
We started this podcast as a means to share the wealth of information and quality conversations that we're having in our world as we dream up and deliver ways for each of us to live into the new paradigm, one that is regenerative, balanced, and whole.
We want to put the microphone in front of the voices that need to be heard the most right now: the farmers, the dreamers, the designers, and the doers.
So come cultivate a better world with us. We're so glad you're here. Now, let's dig in.
Wow, I can't believe that January is already almost over. 2023. What a time. I was just talking to a friend of mine on the phone. She's actually your friend too, Mom. And she was saying, I'm sure you can probably guess who it is, that February 1st feels like a much more better, fun, more appropriate day to make goals and intentions than January 1st. And I think I agree.
Well, you know why that might be? Because February 1st is the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. So it means we're headed into spring on February 1st. It doesn't, we don't think of it that way in our culture, but it's one of the cross quarter days from like the ancient Celtic calendar that sort of announces the approach of the next season. So, yeah.
That's super cool. So, and in the Celtic tradition, that day is known as Imbolc.
Yeah.
It refers to the first milk of the ewes, the baby lambs, as the lambing season begins, promising new and spring life.
Yeah, and it's also known as St. Bridget's Day. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Bridget, she's a figure of ancient Celtic folklore. And she's also a recognized historical figure in the church. And we claim Bridget as the patron saint of Lady Farmer. And there's lots of reasons for that. So if you aren't familiar with Bridget and all the wonderful stories and legends surrounding her, you can hear all about it in a special episode that we're airing next week. It's a replay of an episode that we had 2 years ago with Kathy Spar, a spiritual director, and we're talking all about Bridget and the history of her and the legend and folklore around her. We'll be reprising that episode on Tuesday of next week, January 31st. So we invite you to tune into that and find out why we feel so connected to the spirit of Bridget at Lady Farmer, and to learn about how you can incorporate the blessing of Bridget into your life as we move towards spring.
Yeah, and how you can start to set those goals and intentions. We're reclaiming Imbolc as the new year. Hey, it's Lady Farmer New Year. So a great thing also about Lady Farmer New Year, that's something that I just coined in this moment, is that we start the Slow Living Challenge, the annual Slow Living Challenge. We've done it for the past few years and it's really fun. We will start it the Monday of the following week. So Monday, February 6th. And the Slow Living Challenge is a free challenge open to anyone who listens to this podcast, anyone who doesn't listen to this podcast, and their mothers and grandmothers and brothers, sisters. This is not exclusive. All you have to do to participate is sign up at the link in our show notes so that you get the initial welcome email that outlays everything and explains everything that's going on. And then throughout the next 5 weeks, so the entire month of February and into March, we will have a different theme for every week with prompts and reflections, and so little ways that we can all be slowing down together. And we'll be sharing our experiences over Instagram. And this is a really fun way to connect with one another. I remember we did this in 2020. Actually, if you'll recall, February 2020 was pre-pandemic. So we did the slow living challenge right up until it was time for everyone to live very, very slowly in ways that we hadn't before. So that was interesting timing. But I do remember that time 3 years ago when we did that. It was so fun to connect to all these great people that we didn't know yet by using the hashtag Slow Living Through the Seasons and Slow Living Challenge. And we connected to some people that ended up becoming podcast guests, and it was just a great opportunity to broaden this community. So we hope that you'll join us. And the sign up is at the link in our show notes, and that is so you get the initial welcome email that explains everything.
And don't worry, you might think, oh, 5 weeks, a challenge. For the most part, these are things that really don't take up a lot of time, and you can participate in any way you choose. And there are several activities to choose from throughout the weeks. So you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do, or, maybe you just want to focus on the themes themselves. So it's sort of kind of do it your way. So come on and join us.
So back to Bridget and Imbolc and spring lambs. That's perfect segue into today's episode, which is all about wool.
Yeah, we're talking about wool, but not wool clothing. Today, we're so happy to introduce you to Andrew Legge of Havelock Wool, who's talking to us about wool insulation. So wool is one of the very oldest building materials, but one that's fallen out of use in the construction industry in modern times, and we're going to tell you all about why.
In this interview, Andrew tells us some really surprising facts about wool as a natural insulator and how it is a far better alternative to commercial insulation for moisture and climate control, mold and mildew suppression, sound absorption, thermal conductivity, fire resistance, and all of the things that you really want from your insulation. This is a lively conversation with lots of information. So you'll definitely want to tune in, especially if you are getting ready to embark on any kind of build or renovation, or are thinking about building a little tiny house or a van refit. That's something that we think wool insulation would be perfect for. So you will enjoy this for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting to anyone who's concerned about the health and quality of their living environment and what's in their walls. And we think you'll find this really interesting and informative, and so we hope you enjoy it. So here's Andrew Legge of Havelock Wool.
My name is Andrew Legge. I'm the founder of Havelock Wool. This is something that, I definitely didn't set out and plan to have a career at some stage in alternative insulation. But nevertheless, we are in our 10th year. We've learned an awful lot on this journey. It's always been sort of based on the same thing, which is, we've got this wildly high integrity, high quality, high performance fiber, which is frankly probably the most dynamic on the planet. And guess what? This fiber has evolved over thousands of years as an insulator. So, for us, this is very much just a common sense play for some people who love the outdoors, love the environment, love thinking and acting sustainably. And of course, we've been through every twist and turn that, any entrepreneur would go through in trying to take an idea or a concept and actually make it work in a commercial manner. So, I've always kind of wanted to do things a little bit differently than everyone else. I grew up outside New York City. I followed a very traditional path, into the finance space. I tried to get out of it a couple times. I, ultimately ended up in a kind of interesting spot in Southeast Asia, working towards the development of the capital markets of Vietnam. The reason why that's relevant is while we were there, of course, we were traveling all over the world. I had just gotten married. And as part of that, we started to spend a fair bit of time in New Zealand. And I'll fast forward through all those years and just say that, in all of our travels, we were becoming very aware of some really unique and interesting things happening in New Zealand. And so in my wanting to finally take a big step out of the finance space and do something more meaningful to me, right? And I've got a lot of friends that are still in that space, so I'm not here to say anything bad about it. I just, it wasn't working for me. But I was using my background and applying it to what I thought was a great opportunity to get into business development and taking really great products that were, innovative, well-marketed, and just looking for a bigger marketplace. And I have the right accent for that in terms of, us spending time in New Zealand. We built a house in Havelock North, on the North Island. That's why our company is called Havelock Wool. And, basically I just turned up there and was looking for things to do, based on this thesis. And I was agnostic about what it might look like. So I was just I jumped headfirst into any conversation that anybody was willing to have. And of course, it's a fairly small place, and so you can make your way around pretty quickly. And I met some folks that wanted to get into wool insulation, and they wanted to bring the concept, which was being used readily in New Zealand, to other markets, notably the US. And so a lot happened, which I'll fast forward through so we don't put anybody to sleep. And I'll just say that I had all sorts of conversations with market participants, architects, builders, installation installers here in the US, even before we moved back, which ultimately happened. And, we didn't do anything straight away. There was just this idea and this interest in wool, which I, have a lifetime of appreciating. It's very rare that I'm not wearing something wool. I just started to learn about the science of the fiber, and, I'm curious and I'm fairly analytical. And so, as I started to learn, there was just this, like at every turn, this fiber was just standing, on its own 4 feet, I guess. And just in every measurable way, so much better than anything else available. And so as I had these conversations, momentum was building towards actually creating a company, putting a product in the market. And so after a couple of years of understanding this and having conversations in 2013, we finally said, let's put a business together and give it a go. And so, we went back to all the people we had talked to before we launched the business and said, okay, great. You guys gave us the green light. You said you were really interested in these products. Well, now we've made them. Are you ready to use them? And they were like, oh yeah, that. Oh, we'll talk. We'll see if we can find a client that wants to use that. Right. And all of a sudden, we're in this incredibly slow moving space that doesn't have any interest in change. And we're fighting this uphill battle as we're communicating with the trade. Well, we're in our 10th year. I think we've built a business, we've built a brand, people call us a lot more than we call them. And, we still have a long way to go, but for sure in our 10th year, we feel like, we're in a great position based on everything that we've done to get here. We started the business based on, this view that we would follow the traditional paths to market, which is, lunch and learns with architects, drinking beers with builders, and, helping them understand that there was this great alternative in wool. And the conversations were great, but they led to nothing, from actually getting our products into walls, which of course is the ultimate goal, right? And so, but what we did do, of course, is we were talking to family and friends, and what we realized is that every time we talked to the owner occupier of the space, great things happened, right? We had an audience that cared and was interested, and of course, isn't everybody, right? But when you get the right crowd, you're able to talk about, how dynamic this fiber is. It's pretty easy to get people to spend a little bit more on a segment of an overall build that typically occupies about 1.8% of construction costs. Insulation is not super expensive against the construction budget. So we found that in those conversations, great things were happening. And so we basically sat back and, we try to be small and nimble and, smarter than the competition wherever possible. And so we just decided to, about 5 years ago, focus on direct to consumer. And so we do a ton of digital content marketing. So ideally now, what happens is nobody thinks about insulation, right? And then they get to the part of the build where, all of a sudden builder's like, okay, don't come around for a couple of days because we're going to fill your house with toxic garbage. And the person's like, wait a minute, what are you going to use? And then it's like, oh God, I don't think I want that. And so there's this quick run to the Google box. Somebody types in alternative, healthy, whatever type of insulation. And hopefully we're doing our job. You're finding us.
You just described what I went through about 3 years ago.
Yeah, it happens all the time, right? I mean, some people just don't care, right?
Yeah.
Some people are like, okay, great, I'll see you in 3 days when the installation's done. So, like there's a huge shift in what's going on, in the demand space amongst consumers, and it's a fast growing part of the market. But let's be realistic. There are also still lots of people out there that don't care.
Yeah.
But for those people that do, we try to be right there, and then we've built our business around this model where, we can ship right to your job site, and we do it all day, every day. And it's really, really fun and exciting.
You've said a couple of times that wool is a very dynamic fiber. I want you to talk about that a little bit. And also, for the listeners, what are the practices, the conventional practices in the building industry that you are seeking to evolve to a healthier, more planetary and human beneficial result?
Sure. So, first and foremost, the dynamic nature of a wool fiber, this thing has evolved as an insulator across thousands of years, right? It's really that simple. And then if you want to get into the science of it, all you have to do is get a microscope and a whole bunch of different fibers. And if you look at a coarse wool fiber versus a synthetic one, it'll become very clear very quickly why you don't get the performance from a synthetic fiber. It's a hollow tube that might do something useful for you until you take it out of its element enough times and then it stops working, right? Think about like a capilene base layer if you're backcountry skiing or, running outside in any type of weather. If you're wearing capilene, which is, petrochemical based synthetic fiber, it's going to work for a little while, but, probably after 6, 8, 12 months, it's going to start to smell bad. You're not going to be able to get the smell out. It's because of that fiber. There's nothing in there that allows it to, once it gets overrun, to continue to perform. And so, there's a whole bunch that goes into this, right? There's design obsolescence. Like, okay, this thing doesn't work anymore. What am I going to do? Throw it out and buy another one. We've created a culture that adheres to that in the last, 50 years. And, prior to that, like my dad grew up on a farm in Vermont, and, you bought a wool overshirt and you wore it your whole life because it lasts, right? And so we are very much a part of that way of thinking. And of course, we're talking about high quality, right? If you want high quality fibers in your life, you have to pay for them. But the idea is you pay once and they work forever.
This is something that comes up so often in these conversations that currently, especially in this culture of design obsolescence, the consumer expects to have to replace things all the time. And therefore, they expect things to be as cheap as possible. So those of us in the sustainability and regenerative space are really trying to, sort of help shift the thinking there that just like what you just said, you want quality, you want long lasting, you want effectiveness, you want things that are safe, then yes, there is a cost.
Yeah. And we call the other side of that in insulation. It's a manufacturer-led race to the bottom, right? The only measurable unit in insulation over the last 40 years has been cost. And if the cheapest wins, then of course the product's going to be garbage. And so let's go back to your question. What's so great about wool? It's the inherent construct. It's the evolution in nature over time that protects these animals from the elements. Hot, cold, wet, dry. It does it all. And when you get back into the microscope and you see the construct, you're going to see 5 follicles in there that are going to absorb and desorb moisture against 65% relative humidity. The fiber is designed to do that. It does it on the sheep's back. It does it off the sheep's back. It's a keratin. It's protein based, so it doesn't support the growth of mold, right? So you're inevitably, particularly as we build these days, you're going to have moisture. You're going to have condensation. You're going to have vapor drive behind your walls, in your attic. And you need an insulation fiber product that can manage that moisture and not be adversely affected over time. The amino acids in wool will irreversibly bond with formaldehyde, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide. It's taking harmful chemicals out of the air and it's holding on to them. And, some of these bonds are polar. So like you could take these things out and you could submerge them in water and the thing would break down and you could put it back. Nobody does that, but you can. So then, back to those follicles and what they do, sound attenuation. Wool stands out amongst other forms of insulation and being better for attenuating sound because, of course, the more noise bounces off surfaces, the more it dissipates. And so in that fiber, again, you can send these sound waves through there and they're going to bounce around and go away. High integrity fiber that literally nature's intention for it was insulation. So for us, and back to, before I founded the company, it was just so commonsensical to sit there and say, why don't we offer this to people, right? We're just here to educate people, help them make informed decisions in the building space where nobody's really doing that. It's more of like, oh, come into my world and I'll build you a house. But guess what? I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah. Don't ask questions.
Yeah. And it happens every time, right? Somebody goes and finds a builder. It's the best builder on the planet. Their friends told them how great they are. These are all the projects they've done, whatever. 6 months later, you're at odds with each other. You're over budget. You're behind timing. And all of a sudden, the shines come off this greatest builder ever, but you're stuck with it. You can't sue contractors. And so it's just amazing to us how much we hear like, oh yeah, like I really want to use this product. Let me see if it's okay with my builder. And it's like, I've got builder buddies, right? And it's like, what do you mean? Let me see if it's okay with my builder. It's your house. You're writing the checks. Do whatever you want. And it's such a weird dynamic in the space.
That's so interesting.
But it happens over and over and over again. So like we have white papers that we give to people, like how to deal with your builder when you want to use wool, how to deal with your husband when you want to use wool. I mean, like this is all stuff that we deal with. And it's because we made this switch and we said, let's go talk to the consumer because we know they want our products and let's do everything we can to help them push this into their project. So the way that we want to evolve building is we want people to slow down.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't need to be a race, right? Build smarter, build better, build less, right? What do you need 6,000 or 8,000 square feet for? I mean, if you got 7 kids, sure. But so many people build big spaces and they use a quarter of it. It's just to show off to their friends. It's totally unnecessary. And if you can get in the conversation early and saying like, hey, why don't you build 2,500 square feet instead of 3,500 square feet? And then you don't have to think about anything relative to spending more money on better materials, right? Because you're buying way less of them. And so, boy, is that an uphill battle because the entire industry is like, no. We got to get built this fast. We got to get it done. My client needs it. They want it, blah, blah, blah. And like, oh, like this is the fastest way to insulate a house. So this is what we're going to do. And there's just no thought to what we're building, how we're building it, what the longevity of it is. We see these big fancy houses go up near us and I've got friends that have built in there and I've got friends that have owned in there. And I mean, literally it's overpriced junk. Yeah. And it's really sad. I've met with the head of sustainability at, some of the biggest firms in the world. They don't do anything. They talk. Yeah. They don't act. Yeah. And so, the evolution of building for us can be very simple. Like slow down and do a better job. Because don't build space that you don't need. And I think that's happening. Like, I think there's a big generational shift. And I think people are looking at these big mansions and stuff. And
because now we have to deal with that. People are having to deal with their parents' stuff. And it's kind of a reaction.
Who wants to pay the upkeep? Who wants to pay the heating bill, the cooling bill? Like, I think, the U.S. will start to see what you see in the U.K., where a lot of these old castles, they get broken up and, they turn into co-op living and apartments. And like, that'll be cool, right? But you'll probably see that, in Potomac and whatever the fancy places are by you guys, where
Yeah.
these huge houses,
Oh, yeah.
over time. Like, I think just, I don't know. I mean, there's 8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be plenty of people occupying.
Soon to
but
be
like,
9. Well,
No, you're so right, though. You're asking the hard question, and that's why it's slow, and that's why it's a daily fight. But you're asking the only question that we should be asking, which is, why are we doing it this way? And why don't we do it this other way?
people call us and they want to talk. But we're so much different than every other installation company, because most people, it's like, they just want to get it over with and pretend whatever junk is going in their walls isn't really there.
yeah.
We have the flip side, like you can see in my background, this job. Of course, all of our jobs look like that, but we get calls and commentary all the time of people saying, I don't want to put the wallboard up.
Yeah.
And love the wool, right? You don't hear that from fiberglass or cellulose,
The pink
or
stuff.
mineral wool. Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, oh God.
We've been in the renovation project on this house for 4 years at least. So we do one little bit at a time, and we went through the whole insulation thing, and I said I don't want the pink stuff, and was looking at alternatives, and all in all, he's been very patient and done what we asked. But I realize that is the exception, not the rule in the building industry, because these guys are in a hurry. They have timelines, and they just want to run to Home Depot and get a truckload of this stuff and stick it in and, be on their way. But what I was going to say was, I asked him, I said, I had him look at the website and compare. And he came back and said, surprise, surprise. This is something that's for a informed consumer. We all know that. That's what we've been talking about.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the bottom line. The consumer needs to be interested, informed. They need to pay attention, to what's going into their project, and really care a lot about it. And the first thing people are going to say is, "Oh my gosh, it costs so much." But to your point, that goes to the reassessing your needs, your building needs, your space, and all that stuff. And that's a whole nother conversation. And I love that point.
And when you think about it, why do we build houses? Is insulation not like the most important part of having a house? Like, isn't that what it is?
Well,
It's protecting.
100%. I'm glad you said it. This is the crazy thing for me. It's like, the envelope is arguably the most important part of the building.
Yeah.
It's what protects you from the elements. So it's always been a head scratcher for me to say, why are we taking the cheapest crap that we can find and putting it in the space that protects us from the elements? It doesn't make any sense, right? And people have gotten, again, part of this manufacturer-led race to the bottom, like, oh, you can't see it and it doesn't matter, so who cares? Well, totally disagree. It's a great opportunity to actually put something of high quality in there and allow it to perform for you. And that's why we have a refrigerator in our office loaded with handwritten notes of people saying, I can't believe how amazing this wool makes my house feel. Thank you. And that's just, that's another area where we're really proud of what we do. And look, yeah, we cost more, but you get more. And if I were out there trying to take, 30% market share from fiberglass, I'd be worried about, what we're trying to do in this argument. But that's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get to the people that care, like your builder said, the informed consumer. That's our client, and that's the person that we really enjoy working with. And, look, it's like organic food. Once you go down this path, you don't go backwards.
Right.
You don't, once you eat a strawberry from the farmer's market, you don't go back to the grocery store and get a conventional one that tastes like air and water, right? Like, it's the same kind of thing. And so, that's been a belief of mine for a long time, and it's played a role in why I wanted to create this. Is like, there are people out there that want to do it better, and it's more work. And it's harder, but it's worth it. And like, those are the people that I want to spend my time with. So I'm going to, create a company that offers them a product so we can have a conversation.
Well, so why is it more work and so much more expensive if it is so natural and so it's just wool? Why is it so much more expensive and difficult?
Well, because, there's only so much wool in the world, right? So that creates a challenge for the pricing of it, right? Like, a synthetic fiber, you can make it and you can make endless amounts of them. Again, we got to get to the sustainability piece because, synthetic fibers are petrochemical based. There is a cost, and it's not one that, the manufacturer of the fiber pays. It's what we pay when, read the news. And we're contributing to that. And so back to your point, like, where do my fibers come from? They come off the back of an animal that eats grass fed by rainfall. Sheep numbers are going down, right? Demand for wool, demand for sheep is coming off. There used to be 70 million sheep in New Zealand. Now there's 30 million.
Whoa.
There's a big shift to dairy. There are supply and demand dynamics in the creation of wool in the marketplace that mean that it costs more for a wool fiber than it does a synthetic one. So that's the answer. Like, the fiber costs more. My process costs next to nothing. My power bill is like $6,000 a month. The most significant part of my power is the natural gas for the heat in winter. It has nothing to do with actually making insulation. It has to do with keeping employees warm. Because we run 60-year-old repurposed carding machines that, run on electric VFD motors. And they're just big drums that turn. It takes literally almost no power. And so, what we see in the sustainability argument doesn't make any sense to us. And there's zero common sense. It's all about big business. You'll hear these big manufacturers say that they save more energy than they use. Well, congratulations, I guess. If you compare yourself to yourself, then, maybe that makes sense, right? But what if you use me versus them? Now what are we talking about from a differential in sustainability? And this is where there's more frustration in the industry that continues. And that is, we've gone through the environmental product declaration process, and there's no common sense in it. I mean, if you just think about, sheep get a haircut, right? That they need that twice a year. They get a haircut because they're out walking around the field, they're eating the grass that's fed by rainfall. They get a haircut, their wool gets cleaned in a very low energy but water intensive manner. And New Zealand's a great place for that because about 85% of the fresh water in New Zealand runs into the ocean. So you'll see these wool scours they grab the water, they use it to clean the wool, and then because of what is in the wool, lanolin and other substances that come out, it's effluent, so it then goes back and is reused as fertilizer. Cool. And then the wool is, some of the cheapest logistics in the world because it's packed so densely in a 20-foot container. We have to use a special trailer once it hits the port in Oakland to get it up to us because it weighs so much. So we're literally like the bottom decile for logistics costs and moving raw material to our facility. And then it goes through this very light touch process through these old carding machines. And then it goes in a bag and gets shipped to you. And then wool is biodegradable. You can put it in the ground and it will go away. Amazing. So there's nobody that has a better footprint than us. But yet, if you go onto some of these, websites that are starting to aggregate this data, somehow fiberglass insulation has a lower score in the realm of environmental product declarations than we do.
Weird.
Yeah.
It's rigged. It's rigged.
Can you?
The game is rigged.
Do they show their work? That's weird.
Yeah.
What about landfill?
Yeah.
What about the fact that the product, particularly with foam, that stuff doesn't go away ever.
I know.
So
this all goes to the point where at some point, you can't even trust stuff you read on a website.
No, so
you have to really know.
We play the common sense game.
Right? Yes.
Our buyers have brains and they use them regularly. So they ask us really interesting questions and we do our best to respond to them. What we always do is respond honestly, right? Even when we don't know the answer, we'll tell you that. But we ask you to, we'll show you our power bill. I put it on Instagram. We don't have anything to hide. And so, transparency is our thing. And the declarations and the accolades, that's all greenwash garbage for, industry participants that want to be able to say, I use Green Guard products, or, I only specify this or that. And, you've got like the embodied carbon network out of, it's historically been run kind of out of University of Washington. I don't really know where it sits now. But, you've got industry professionals that are kind of trying to sit back and say, hey, let's get off the numbers, right? And let's think about the materials. And if we use all the right materials, then the net effect is going to be the right one. Versus like, give me a performance number for how the house is going to function, and I'm going to overlook all the materials that are in there.
Tell us about embodied carbon. What is that?
Well, so one of your questions is embodied carbon versus, operational carbon,
yes.
Right? And so, now we can start talking about the built environment and, its 40% contribution to greenhouse gases, right? What we understand is that about 11% of that 40% contribution is materials, right? And so the embodied carbon in those materials is, what does it take to make that product and get it to the job site, get it into the wall. And then in some instances, as we just talked about, it's also measuring, what happens when that structure is knocked over and where does that product end up? Foam never goes away. So you're talking about, probably the highest embodied carbon in the insulation industry would be spray foam. And then things like wool can be biodegraded. So, that would be considered incredibly low on the embodied carbon side of things. And you've got cellulose, which is, paper, basically. Where does paper come from? Trees. So they get huge credit for the biogenic carbon and the sequestration that happens in trees. And so, these measurements can vary. But again, if you just get away from whatever somebody's trying to tell you, their latest badge of honor is, and just use common sense, then you can get into a place where you can have a positive impact through material selection based on our understanding of what that embodied carbon is. And that goes into, where does the product come from? Is it natural? Trees and paper, obviously quite natural. What does it take to change that product from its natural form to an insulation medium that can be used, in a structure, right? That factors in. So now you're thinking about fiberglass and rock wool, where they have to make their fibers and they have to use all of this energy to do that in extreme high heat. And so all of that has to then be factored into the embodied carbon of their products, which of course is much higher. And then the operational carbon, which is a huge part of the built environment, is what does it actually cost to run these buildings and how efficient are they, right? So back to your point, Emma, like if a building's not well insulated, it's not going to run efficiently. And you're going to have to run the heater and the air conditioner much longer than you might if you did insulate it properly and you thought about, how you should build it. And, we don't subscribe to, build tight and ventilate things because, what happens when the power goes out? You get major problems inside your building. So, there is a way to build, airtight and let vapor move. And so these are very important considerations that, people should be thinking about. And so, the cool thing is there are big bets being made on real estate tech, climate tech, and it's all about the built environment. And this, staggering figure of, 40% of GHG is coming from the built environment. And then you start listening to guys like Ed Masria, and they're telling you where I can't remember exactly what it is, but we got 2.4 trillion square feet on the planet in the current built environment as of a couple of years ago. That's going to double over the next 40 years. So think about every building you've ever seen in all of your travels and all of your life, and now multiply it by 2 over the next 40 years. Like, yikes, right?
Yeah.
So
it's something like another Manhattan being built every month.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, that's insane.
Yeah, it's gross.
That's mind blowing. You mentioned something called biophilic design on your website. what is that? And does that play into this sort of movement of sustainability and more common
they're
sense
certainly
in the
intertwined.
construction industry?
They're intertwined. The biophilic piece is like, it's better for us and our psyche and our well-being to have as much nature in our life as we can. That's the premise. And it's like, how much nature can I bring in? So like, living walls in your house. Like I've seen very cool designs where, people are doing, kitchen designs and so, it's bringing, of course, that growth and that humidity and, all of the positive elements that come from, this natural world and this natural being, of course, bringing plants inside and, and looking out your window, Mary, and, right there, you've got, beautiful trees that are, they're not in your space, but, they're in your,
the natural light even.
Yeah.
And
they're
the plaster walls, Mom, that's like how that feels so great. And like, that's a natural substance and straw bale and all that.
Yeah. And there are just tons of studies for, that make it quite clear that, our cognitive function is improved when we introduce these things to our life versus, right. Now let's go to the small apartment in New York or London that, maybe has a window, maybe the window's drowned out by another building across the way. And so you're living in this sort of concrete, existence that, like, frankly, we just, we're not historically designed to live that way.
And what I think about a lot too is, like the schools, like you're in school all day and it's just fluorescent lights and there's no windows or anything. And that's like how a lot of kids spend most of their life for the first 18 years.
Yeah.
You're talking about common sense and paying attention. If you look at the architecture of so many of our, government buildings and, elementary schools and middle schools, and you think this is where we send our young minds into these structures to spend their whole day, every day, so many months of the year. And it's sort of mind boggling, and you think. So
there's a guy here, that this is a total sidebar, but it's quite cool and I'm proud of it. There's a guy here who's a DC guy. My wife went to Holton Arms, and Taylor went to Landon. And he went on to play lacrosse at Princeton, and then he did a master's in education at Brown. And he started a school out here called the Tahoe Expedition Academy. And it's a totally different way of learning. And it is all about getting out of the classroom.
Cool.
And my 4-year-old goes to school there. And,
that's awesome.
That was sort of always the hope, but it's cool because they were building some new classrooms 4 or 5 years ago, and we insulated them.
No way. That's amazing.
I know Taylor, and, we were just getting going, and, I basically said, this is what you do when you're just trying to find your way into projects. I said, listen, we want to do schools. We'll do whatever it takes. So I just said, give me the bill for the fiberglass and I'll match it. So I basically gave it away.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to hear that and say, hey, I want to do that too. And, that's what you do when you're just starting out. Sadly, we don't do that anymore. But it's just like, I'm so proud. I mean, I dropped my son off and he marches into that classroom, which is full of windows, full of natural light, insulated with wool. And they literally, rain or shine, weather doesn't matter. You better have your gear. Like, they're going to be outside most of the day, at least 3 days a week. And it's a new curriculum. It's Harvard and Knowles are outward bound. I think there's 25 or 26 schools that are apply to this sort of outdoor education, and it's awesome. And I think it's really cool the way that they learn. And I think it addresses, like, some of these things where it's like, all right, let's pile into the concrete jungle and, learn some stuff that, may or may not be applicable to the way that we're going to live. So, should everybody shift to that? No, of course not. But it is interesting that these things are out there and, they're coming about more and more.
I think the common sense piece plays very much into that. If people stop and pause and, think about these things and certain things come out seeming very obvious. But
oh gosh.
Okay, Andrew, I want to talk to you about sourcing before we start wrapping it up.
Yeah.
Your stuff is all sourced in New Zealand, and I know that it's just top-notch wool. Is as you scale, can it be from other places? Like I live around a whole bunch of wool producers here. They grow sheep. We have flocks and flocks of sheep around, and they would love for a market for their product.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I mean, how can we scale this thing up and, really create an industry for local wool producers here in our Chesapeake Bay area? We call it the Chesapeake Fiber Shed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've talked to those people.
Yeah. Tell me.
Oh, yeah. I've talked to folks in Virginia. So we get calls all the time. Like, hey, we got some wool. Can you guys help?
Yeah.
Right.
And we really want the answer to be yes.
Mm-hmm.
And thus far, it's been no. We have, a personal interest and love affairs with New Zealand. The reason why we buy there is there's a consistent, abundant supply, and there's a very sophisticated trade that makes it cost effective to get wool. I mean, 85% of the wool that's grown in New Zealand is processed offshore, right? So they have a trade that's very sophisticated and very efficient in growing wool, cleaning wool, packaging wool, shipping wool.
Infrastructure. Right? They've got the infrastructure to make it efficient.
We don't have any of that here.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have the volume to create that. So we have this incredibly antiquated process, which leads to these stories that you keep hearing of like, it costs me more money to shear the wool than it does, for me than what I can fetch for it if I go to sell it. So people say, oh, you hear this all the time. I'm throwing my wool away. Can't you just process it? Well, we're moving in the right direction, right? And so the first thing I can tell you is that in the scouring process, there's something left over called vegetable matter, or VM. And the VM that is left over in our wool is 0.1% or less. In the US, you're going to be lucky to be below 1%, and you're probably going to be more like 1.5%. So that's 10 to 15 times more stuff in the wool than what I get from New Zealand. And my machines are really sensitive. So like 1/1000th of an inch makes a difference.
You talked about scouring. That's the initial cleaning of the wool. So right out of the field, correct? So when you're scouring, you're like, it's like leaves and mud and all that kind of stuff. So when you're talking about stuff being in it, you're talking about stuff that's really out of the field that sheep was in. Is that right?
That's right. So it's very difficult for me to hoover up this wool that's out there and bring it here and process it. The other thing is back to the infrastructure. U.S. trucking costs a fortune, and we don't have this centralized place. There's a scour in Texas, there's a scour in South Carolina. They don't run all the time. They cost a lot. But, that's all the negative. The positive is we are having conversations. We are talking to these fiber sheds and these co-ops that exist. And we are trying to step into the mix and find a way to process. And there's the potential that the pricing gets to a point where we can do it, right? That's the other thing that I didn't mention is the amount of wool that I can have delivered to my door, again, because of these efficiencies and because of the foreign exchange, which of course fluctuates, but it's generally in our favor. It means that buying wool in New Zealand is quite a bit cheaper than buying wool in the US. And for us, when we're already forced to charge a premium because our fibers cost more, it's hard to take on something that costs even more than what we already have.
Yeah.
Now, as we develop our processing, there are different ways of doing things which we're starting to look at, and in fact, we'll be doing with a new processing line later this year. There's a chance that we can run this stuff with less concern and sensitivity towards that leftover vegetable matter because it's going to process differently, which means we might be able to make insulation out of US wool. And then the other question that, of course, is very interesting to us is, there are other places in the world where there's lots of wool that's great for insulation, Eastern Europe, the UK. And so we would really like to be expanding in what we're doing and our offering into other places around the world. We're currently producing in New Zealand for the Australian market, which is kind of cool. I'm constantly looking around for outsourced production capacity, and it's hard to find. We don't have enough money to go set up a facility in Europe,
or Virginia.
Yeah, exactly. Where he goes, but there's a bunch of fiber processing that happens in the Southeast.
Yeah,
there's some.
We've gotten close to partnering there, and we're still trying. We haven't landed anything yet.
Well, I have a whole bunch of bags of wool from my little flock of 5 sheep in my garden shed. Can I give that to you and have you use it? Just kidding. Yeah.
I wish. Before I can touch it, it has to go to South Carolina or Texas.
I know.
And that's the problem.
So I have a quick question. You might have already answered it with your son's school, but do you have a project that you're most proud of that you've gotten to work on?
Wow, cool question. That's probably it. Anything that we can do in the education space, I'd like to be the go-to insulator for every bit of educational building that gets built, whether it be, dorms for living or classrooms for learning. And it's a different process, for getting into those things. And we just focused our small business attention in other places, but we'll come back around to it. So, to answer your question, we've done some other schools. And so I would say that, I would say, the 10 schools that we've done ish, they're all on the list. They're on the top of my list of, what I'm proud of. We have a really cool business. I don't know if you guys see much of this where you are. This van conversion world has really gone crazy. And we've kind of become the go-to insulator for vans. It's really fun for us to get to participate in that.
So this podcast is all about slow living and sustainability. And I really loved what you were saying about slow building and everything, just slowing everything down and really evaluating what we need. And so on that note, can you talk a little bit about what slow living means to you?
Yeah. I grew up outside New York City, but, my dad grew up on a dairy farm. And he was, fairly intelligent. So he was well educated and then went to New York for work. But he never really lost those roots. So, we lived further out than everyone else. And, we had 15 acres and cows and all that kind of stuff. And I just spent a lot of time entertaining myself. And, this is before cell phones and all that junk. I mean, there were video games. Luckily, I was never interested in that. But, slow living for me is getting outside all the time, whatever the elements are. It's way more fun to be outside in the elements versus sun. But so, slow living is starts for me in being outside and enjoying everything around you and how dynamic and different that can be. And again, in California, we're lucky, right? Because I can be in the mountains in the morning and at the ocean in the afternoon.
Amazing.
And we do a lot of that, right? And so you get to see a lot of things. And frankly, New Zealand offers the same thing. It's on an even smaller scale, which is to say that, the mountains are still huge and the oceans are beautiful, but everything's even closer than it is in California. It's like a shrunken down version. Embracing all that the outdoors has to offer is the first part of slow living for me. And then the second part is using that to your advantage as you live your life. I mean, I hate cell phones with an absolute passion. And I see no intrinsic value in these things. And I wish that I could get rid of it. And, if I ever get to retire, that's the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that piece of junk. And I like to be informed. And I find that the news is just so incredibly depressing. I've reduced myself to the Financial Times and The Economist. And I'm even slowly getting to the point where it's like, I just have to take it all in dozens because it's all just negative. And so, the outdoors and then the slow living and the self-entertainment, we're in Truckee, and I've got a young one and we've got a bunch of space, we have 10 acres and we mess around outside all the time. And I just think it's so rewarding to be able to appreciate the outdoors and to entertain yourself versus the alternative, right? Which is this 24-hour news cycle and this constant blah, blah, blah on your face. And, like, we know why it happens because people follow it and it sells, and, people consume and buy more junk. And, for me, it's a real race in the wrong direction. So, slow living is, enjoying the outdoors, enjoying your space, enjoying your community, enjoying your friends, and like not staring at your phone when you're having a conversation with them.
Love it.
We're kindred spirits. Andrew.
It's crazy how hard that is. Yeah.
I don't know how that answer resonates, but I can tell you it's the truth. So
yeah, it's great.
I'm a big fan of that. So it makes it easy to live your life if you just tell the truth all the time.
Agreed. So here's a question we ask all of our guests. What does the good dirt mean to you? The good dirt. What does the good dirt mean to you?
I don't know how to answer this question. And like,
okay.
I very rarely get stumped. And so I've looked at this question. I'm like, I wonder if we're going to get to this and it's going to be interesting. I'm going to give you a shot, right? And I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer.
No, there's definitely a right. There's one right answer. Just kidding. Go for it.
We love how everybody does this differently.
I'm never short of an opinion or commentary. And, I don't know if this is right or wrong or if there is one. But when I think about the good dirt, I think about New Zealand. And I think about the way that people live their lives there. And it's very much a part of the narrative that I just went through that I won't, go through again. But I think about the way that things grow. We're about 38 degrees north here in Tahoe, and when you go west, you've got Napa, and then you've got the ocean. We were in wine country on North Island, which is about 38 degrees south. And so it's almost the exact opposite, very similar climates. And things just grow like crazy. They don't in Tahoe, of course, but they do down the hill from us. And so when I think about all of the planting that we did when we built our house and the way that this stuff exploded, not in year one, but in year 2 to year 5, it was like, it was this house on the hill and exposed because everything had been cut back so the land could be farmed. And we just started planting everything native and bringing all that stuff back. And all of a sudden, like, you can't see the house because there's just so much richness in that soil and so much growth happening and so much weather moving through. And so for me, that's the good dirt, when you can put stuff in the soil and you can watch it grow. And in an ideal world, it's doing it naturally. And, I've spent a lot of years watching the planet get destroyed, and it bums me out. And you didn't ask me what the bad dirt is, but I think there's a lot of bad dirt out there too. And I think it would be great if we could all focus more on, the good dirt and preserving it.
I like that answer. New Zealand. Now I want to go there. I've never been.
Yeah.
Best place on earth.
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
Yeah, and your product certainly promotes good dirt for sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I put wool in, like when I plant stuff here, planted a couple of apple trees this fall. Yeah. And when I put them in, I wrap the roots up in wool. And it's amazing. I mean, we've run tests here growing tomatoes. And when you put wool in the soil, you get a much different plant. It's really cool.
I believe it.
I've done the very same thing. Yeah. Like I said, I have bags of wool in my garden shed.
Yeah, there's a lot of nutrients in wool. And then, you insulate the roots. When you get water in there, it holds it. So there's just a lot of really positive things happening there. And then as it breaks down, the nutrients end up in the plant. So like, I wish there were more hours in the day. We talk about, we don't have much scraps. Most of the side cuts all of the side cuts that we have in our process go back to the front of the production line. So nothing gets wasted.
Oh, that's an amazing point. There's
not a
lot of production waste. There's no production waste, it sounds like.
No, there isn't. Now, there's a little bit, right, where, the stuff that builds up underneath the machines, these really fine fibers, they're wool fibers. There's a lot of nutrients in them, but we can't run those.
Yeah.
And so we do get a de minimis amount of waste from that. And, we always talk about making them into pellets and selling them to people for fertilizer. We haven't gotten there.
Oh, wow.
So many great takeaways from today's conversation. Lots to digest. But if you could distill it down at all, what do you think what's something that you most want the audience to understand about the work you're doing?
Well, I just think there's a great opportunity to do better in building. And, we're one component of that. And of course, we're proud of what we do. But there's lots of ways to do better. And, that's sort of the conversation that we got into. We've embraced the opportunity to be a part of it. And we've earned our way in. When we started out, we would just sit there and listen and try to learn. And in fact, what we learned is that there's a lot of people in the discussion that don't know what they're talking about. And so once we learned that, we thought, okay, well, if a lot of these people don't know what they're talking about, then, that gives us the right to speak up too, right? Because we're doing our homework and we're learning and we have something of value to add to this equation. We don't talk to talk. We don't talk out of turn. We don't talk about things we don't know about. But we've learned a lot about the built environment. And I can say quite comfortably that the general public has a lot more to learn.
Definitely.
And I love that you guys are doing what you're doing. I love that, we were on the Art of Construction, recently, and they're doing some really cool stuff to help. And it's just this big education process, right? Mm-hmm. And
Yes.
there are
absolutely.
there are lots of people out there that want to learn more, and it's hard. It's challenging. The internet's a daunting place.
Yeah.
Hard to know who to believe. So what I would say as a theme, right? And again, like, we'll keep it about building, but just use common sense, right? If something doesn't seem to make sense, it probably doesn't. So just stop and think about it and, use your brain. And again, I'm not saying use your brain to buy wool. I'm saying use your brain to make a decision that makes sense. And that's different for everybody, right? And so I just think that, the world would be a much better place if we would stop, being overwhelmed by, again, this 24-hour news cycle, these very powerful, very smart marketing machines, and just, slow down, use common sense. And if you do that, you'll get a great result for you, which is the most important thing, right? So yeah, that's the summary for me. If more people were doing that, I think we'd be, leading higher quality existences.
I agree. That's great. That's
wonderful. And I'm just going to, for any listener out there that has a building project going on, house renovation, whatever, if all of this resonates with you, I suggest you go to your builder and just say, I want to talk about the insulation. And when he goes, oh, don't worry about it, we got it covered, say, no, I want to talk about the insulation. There are alternatives.
Yeah.
So this is the position I was in 4 years ago. And, now I know, and I'm very excited about it for the next project.
Yeah. And look, there's something really powerful in that. And again, it's just about informed decisions, right? Yeah. Have the conversation, know what you're getting into, and then, choose what works for you.
I think that just makes so much sense that someone who is really excited about building a sustainable thing, and it's their thing. It's because it's not at all going to be advantageous for some builder or contractor when the consumer doesn't care. They're going to want to do the cheaper thing. So
totally.
I don't know if that made any sense.
I think it's
no, it does. But at the same time, what we're really searching for and trying to create is these builders that do care.
Yeah.
Because we work with an installer in Marin County, north of San Francisco. And I can't wait till there's more guys like this, and there will be. But he is an insulation installer, and he will not use fiberglass.
Oh, wow.
He will not use foam. So if you call him and say, hey, I'm looking for a bid for insulation, the first thing he's going to say to you is, sure, these are the products I use. Are you still interested? And a lot of people, it's amazing to talk to him because like the conversation gets crazy. They're like, what do you mean you don't use fiberglass? He's like, It's toxic junk. I'm not going to work with it. I'm not going to put it in your house. Same thing for foam. And so, like, you know, it stinks that, you know, this is one example, but, you know, we got to keep pushing because we need it to be 10 and then 100 and then 1,000. And it's not going to happen if we don't try.
And until then, the consumer can be informed about not only their insulation, but their food and their clothing and the objects they incorporate into their everyday lives that they purchase. And we talk about this sort of thing all the time. And it just, so many common denominators are just, you know, common sense. Pay attention. Be curious about where things come from. Be curious about why certain materials are used over others. And it's not that it's more time consuming. It's not that it's another job to find out all this place. It's really just about being curious and listening and just pay attention to what's going on around you. And and so delighted to learn that there is this very common sense and natural and age-old alternative for something that we all live with is insulation. So very exciting. And really, thank you for your time today and all in this great conversation.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure. And you know, we're as a wool evangelist, you know, this is what we try to do with our time. You know, like we always say, we need a bigger microphone. Right? Yeah. Because we just, it's such an easy story and it's a fun one to tell. And so
you need a TV show. You need HGTV.
Yeah, people keep telling us that. We just don't know how to get there.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it out in the universe.
Yeah, thanks. If anybody wants to HGTV, please, we'd love to participate.
Yeah. And
How's that for a shameless plug?
When we have our Lady Farmer TV show, you'll be one of our very first guests.
I'd love to. All right, well, listen, you guys have a great day. Thanks a ton for letting me come on here, and thanks for the great questions, and, you know, thanks for being interested in what we do. And, you know,
of course,
we'll be here doing it every day. And
thank you. You have a great rest of your day, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thanks to you guys. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for tuning in, calling in, and spreading the good dirt. You can reach our listener voicemail at 443-459-1950. That's 443-459-1950. You can find this number in our show notes and in the link in our Instagram profile.
This show is produced by Lady Farmer with original music composed and performed by John Kingsley. Our technical partner for this series is Citizen Racecar. Post-production by Alex Brower and Jose Miguel Baez, coordinated by Gabriela Montequin.
For more from Lady Farmer, follow us on Instagram at We Are Lady Farmer. That's We Are Lady Farmer. Or join us online at www.ladyfarmer.com. We'll see you next time on The Good Dirt.